Hello and welcome to Secular Sexuality, the ACA show that takes everything you know and love and slowly but surely deconstructs it to its core elements. It can be painful, but pain can be fun too. I'm Bianca, and with me as always is Christy Powell, who deconstructs concepts for a living.
Howdy, how are y'all doing tonight?
And with us this evening is Erin, an exotic dancer, pastry chef, and atheist writer. That's what's known as the Trifecta here on SexX.
Hello.
Hi, it's lovely to talk with you tonight. I'm so excited for this conversation. So this week we're going to be talking about deconstruction and how important it is to finding yourself and your true life's goals.
That's right. We are breaking down dancing and dissent. So hit us up. We're at 512-991-9242, 991-9242. Or you can call the show at tiny.cc/callsex because the show is starting right now.
Awesome. Well, welcome, Erin. I'm really excited to talk with you, especially because you kind of embody a lot of different things that we like to talk about here on Secular Sexuality, embracing our own sexuality and pursuing that in the ways we like best, and then bring in the atheist component. And of course, pastries are everybody's favorite topic. So let's dive in first to the how you became a dancer and kind of that background. So can you talk us through how this became your career path?
Well, it certainly wasn't something I thought I was going to do when, I was a little girl. I actually wanted to be a lawyer. But I had kind of a rough teenage years when I broke out of my preppy bookworm type thing. And I ended up graduating high school early. And so I was 17 when I moved out. And I really didn't like working a regular job. I started out working at McDonald's because I was 17, and I moved on to like a call center. And I had really, I really needed something else. And I just didn't fit very well with, frankly, I had a really hard time with any kind of authority. And that's pretty much been my whole life. And I had answered an ad to be an out call, like bachelor party girl. So like where you go to people's houses and you jump out of the cake and that kind of thing. And I was turned down
Nice.
Dramatically. It was horrible. And a couple of months later, I decided to try again, and I ended up answering an ad to be a topless waitress. A week after that, they told me, "You're a terrible waitress. Would you like to dance?" And then they said, "Well, actually, you're either going to dance or you're not going to have a job," and which is pretty much like getting fired anyway, because I was an independent contractor. So you are self-employed. So at 18, I became an all-nude dancer, and I really liked it. I had gotten bullied a lot. I was very insecure about my looks as a kid, and dancing really helped me come into myself. It gave me a lot of control over my life. And I really, really enjoyed it. And I enjoyed the freedom of it. And I still have a real problem with authority.
Don't we all?
Never
Yeah,
really
that's
grew
kind
out
of the
that.
theme here. That's really. Oh, sorry, Christy, go ahead.
Well, I was just curious. I'm sorry to take the spotlight off of your story, but having worked in the industry, I'm wondering if that is a common tactic or maybe something that, current and prospective dancers might want to be concerned about. If, getting hired to serve cocktails or work some other part of the business only to then be sort of like bait and switch pushed into a different position is part of the industry, or if that's more just your story.
That's hard to say, because I know that in my area, what my particular scenario was pretty common. That was just how they did it. But to be honest, because I was a topless waitress, I was already on the stage list. So I was already a dancer. I was just serving drinks and collecting minimum wage. That was really the main difference. So I guess it sounds pretty slimy, but I was already like halfway there. So it was sort of like starter. But I really can't speak to other markets per se. because that's the only place I started. And every other place I danced after that, I went there as a dancer. So, but I do know in my particular case in 1997, that was pretty common for where I was.
Yeah, well, I definitely don't mean to paint the whole industry in any kind of seedy light, but there is the potential for exploitation when we're talking about contract workers and younger folks getting their entry-level jobs, and things to be mindful for. So I appreciate you just kind of speaking to that.
Oh, I would absolutely say that. Yeah, if you're walking into any type of business like this, especially because they tend to look for younger girls and things like that, it's absolutely something to look out for. Because I was so suspicious of anybody trying to tell me what to do, I was already in a mode to like fight. So I really wasn't in a position that other girls may be and definitely are to be exploited, because I was already ready to. I think I was only there 6 months when I actually stared down the owner, who I found out later happened to be a member of a biker gang. My story could have ended right there. And I actually lectured him on the contract and independent contractor of law in California. I think he probably thought it was funny. I think that's probably the only reason that like I didn't end up in a really bad situation, is that he was probably like, this little girl's like yelling at me and staring at me. So, but no, you're absolutely right. It's not something to go into with your eyes closed. They definitely are on the lookout for girls that are naive and ready to be taken advantage of.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of thank you for bringing that up too, Christy, because I appreciate you. That's definitely something we want to be mindful of. We are championing sex work on this show and making sure that we are destigmatizing it as much as possible, but that doesn't mean that we can turn a blind eye to some of the more questionable areas of that industry. And hopefully talking about it is one way to begin the process of changing. So I guess my next question for you, Erin, is we kind of touched on it a little bit, starting out with how you got to be a dancer, that struggle of realizing, oh, I'm in a position where I need to make this decision and go all in or lose my job. What are some other struggles you've faced, or what about rewards, just unexpected things that you've been confronted by as you've pursued this?
I think one of the most frustrating things when it comes to dancing is you don't have a set income. You don't know what you're going to make every night. So when you're living on your own and, you're supporting yourself, you don't know, you need that income. And it's almost like you can get into a negative circle where you're not making money. You take it personally because you're making money off your looks. So now, well, I'm not making money because I'm ugly, or, a plethora of other reasons. And you start taking it personally. You go in the next night, your confidence is shot, and you end up in this horrible cycle where your self-esteem is damaged, and then your income suffers because of it. And then you have to figure out a way to bring yourself back up. And then on the flip side of that, you have nights where it's like all of a sudden you're a movie star. People are telling you how awesome you are and how beautiful you are, and like handing you cash, and you can't sit down because you're so busy. And so I think it's that endless up and down. It's really an emotional roller coaster that you kind of willingly put yourself in.
Sounds like being a YouTuber.
I've noticed a lot of parallels when it comes to writing and social media, where that ego boost pushes you to do more. And then when I've made a couple of jokes, on Twitter and things like that have fallen flat. And then I'm like, oh. You're like, oh, I'm not funny.
There's nothing worse than a tweet you think is going to hit real hard and it gets like 2 likes and you're like, oh no, I'm a terrible.
No, I might push back on that. The worst is when you write a joke and people take it seriously. And now you're like either having to explain it, like, or no. You're like, oh wait, I wasn't looking for, like, it was a joke though.
That's one thing we still need to get right. We still need to get that sarcasm font going. All right. So those are some of the more, that's something I haven't really thought about, and definitely something I can see some parallels in, just that spiral of being in front of an audience, whether that's in real life or virtually. How about some things that you needed to deconstruct? So the theme of the night is deconstruction, and I'm curious what you found yourself personally taking apart about your worldview as you're excelling in this job and becoming more comfortable in this position. What are some things that maybe you're bumping up against and saying, oh, I had this assumption about X and actually it's Y instead?
It's hard to say. I'm trying to think. I guess really my major my assumption when I came in is that I had talked to, I can't remember who it was that told me. It was either a manager or another girl or something like that had told me that I was going to be making at least $500 a night, if not more, always consistently every night. So I think I had been dancing for about a week, and I went to a luxury car lot, and I was like, well, this is what I'm going to be making. I'm going to be making $20,000 a month. So, let's take a look at that Jaguar. So I definitely had to reconstruct how I thought about money, finances. That was difficult. When it came to myself, I really grew up with some hangups about how I looked. I'm really short. I'm really pale. I have a lot of freckles. I got teased a lot by the way I looked. And so embracing who I was as opposed to trying to be somebody different, that was really a big, there was a lot of learning and growth that happened there. I met my best friend shortly after I started dancing, and I was really jealous of her. She had blonde hair down to her ankles, just like seriously one of the most beautiful people. You just look at her and you're like, oh, I hate her. And then I met her and I realized she was just as insecure as me, but her insecurity ended up affecting the way that I presented myself, because she basically, I guess we're not friends anymore. And one of the reasons a red flag for me is when she called me her midge to her Barbie, right? Because she was a big blonde one and I was short with her boobs, right? So that should have been a light for me, and it wasn't. But she dressed me up in ways. She thought that I should look like Janis Joplin. So I had a routine that I did in bell bottoms, which is extremely difficult to get out of on stage, by the way. And so I really let her kind of control the way that I looked, the way that I performed. I'm into heavy metal, have been since I was about 13 years old, that whole problem with authority thing probably. And that's what I really wanted. And that's who I was. And until I was able to let her go, or at least stop her from controlling how I looked, because I admired her so much. And I wanted to be blonde and tall, and, I wasn't going to be that. I had to be who I was, and I had to be the best version of me that I could be. And it took a minute to get there. It took a while.
I'd imagine that's also very difficult to do in that industry in particular, I'd imagine, because at least in terms of the media that is mainstream, you do see a very specific type of person gravitating towards that kind of a job. So I'd imagine that sitting with yourself and being like, okay, how do I get to be the best that I am? Probably is a whole thing all on its own.
Definitely. Because you really have to do some self-assessment, and some of that's not always really fun. You have to be like, well, I don't have natural double D's, and I'm not going to be a blonde, and I'm never going to be, I didn't even make it to 5'2". So, you can't get rid of freckles. Trust me, I've tried. So
see, I love freckles though. Freckles are
awesome. Everybody says that.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
Have them. And then we'll come back and we'll have another conversation.
See, I had them when I was a kid and they went away, and I'm bummed about it.
Well, I have them all over except for the parts that don't really show in the sun. And because a lot of clubs have black lights, the pale part glows in the black light and the darker doesn't. So I had somebody, I can't remember where he was from. He was foreign. He was just visiting. And he asked me, and he was very polite about it. He was so sweet. But he thought that I actually had something wrong with me. He thought that I had like a disease, like I had like a skin disease, like some type of miscoloration.
Oh, no.
So,
yeah, black lights can be great or not so great, depending on what you're looking for.
It's not great when you're like vampire pale.
That's fair. That is fair. And then I guess my last question for this section about exotic dancing specifically is, what are some societal level deconstructions that would make sex work in general a little bit easier and a little bit safer? So we talked a little bit at the beginning of the episode about how some organizations and some businesses might prey on young or inexperienced women in order to get them into the spotlight in that way. But there are other things that patrons do, or that other sex workers do to each other. Like there's a whole complex industry there that is suffering from some societal presuppositions about what sex work is. So in your experience, what are some things that maybe as a society we should be taking a closer look at?
Well, one of the things that a lot of people tend to make an assumption about, my assumptions about being in the industry, is that customers are, they're perverts and they're somehow screwed up, or they're all, predators, and they're not. We're talking about regular people. And it's not that I haven't met some bad dudes, because I really have. I've met a couple of guys that have really seriously frightened me. But the vast majority are not like that. They are, they're looking for company, or they're looking for entertainment, or they're, a lot of times it's not necessarily about sex. When you have a regular customer, and maybe not even a regular customer, but somebody that just had a hard day and just wants to talk to somebody that isn't, that isn't their friend. There's a anonymous part to it when it comes to the customers. And most of them are really, really, really normal and kind and nice and respectful. And pretty much the same with the girls. It's a hard job. And so there's definitely a lot of drugs that are involved. There's a lot of competition. So there's a lot of like high school type antics that can go on between the girls. But, we're all insecure in one way or another. And this industry definitely brings out those insecurities when you're directly competing against somebody else. But as far as society goes, the way that they look at both the customers and the dancers is really not all that accurate. We're all people. The vast majority of people are sexual and are interested in sex, whatever that means for them. And that's not bad. We've painted sex as this dirty, horrible, like filthy thing. And it's not. And it doesn't have to be that way. Granted, I think that if it were more out in the open and nudity were more acceptable, and people were more, didn't have so many hangups about sex, I think that the sex industry would probably be damaged by that. I think that the taboo of it would probably make it lose some appeal. But for the most part, there's a lot of misconceptions. I spent 20 years dancing, and I don't hate men. I don't hate other women. I don't think that all men are predators or perverts. Not all strip club owners are scumbags. And not all dancers are drug addicts. So there's a lot of stereotypes that go with it, but I think that has a lot to do with the hangups about sex, which I think has a lot to do with religion, actually.
Exactly. And I'm excited that you brought that up, because that will be kind of the lead into our next interview segment about becoming an atheist and kind of that process of deconstruction. But I do want to touch on something that you mentioned about the competition between women and between sex workers in general, because obviously not all of them are women, but the stereotype in the mainstream about sex workers is so different than the mainstream stereotype for, say, professional modeling, right? It's the same kind of competition. It's the same kind of relying on your body to, make you money, essentially, but it's treated so differently. And the difference there, of course, is the sex part and the overt, acknowledgement that yes, there is a sexual component to this. So I don't know. I'm curious to hear maybe your thoughts on that and why maybe there's a discrepancy between professional modeling and sex work in terms of the stereotypes you brought up.
I just think it has to do with the sex part of it. For some reason, if you're a model, which of course I have a friend that modeled in Paris, and she's like 5 something ridiculous, dude. She's like almost 6 foot tall. And I'm never going to model in Paris. I mean, ever. But I really just think that it has to do with people's sex makes people uncomfortable. It just does. It touches on a very intimate part of us and part that we're not in polite society. We're not really allowed to talk about openly. And I think that when people are insecure or maybe they're not comfortable with themselves, it's a lot easier to attack than it is to actually try to understand or even admit that, maybe it turns you on and that scares you because you have been taught your whole life that it's dirty or bad or a sin or things like that. So I honestly just think the main difference has to do with the way that society in general views sex.
Yeah. Oh, I fully agree with that. Also, I'm getting a little bit of feedback from somebody's computer. So let's make sure that tamps down a bit.
Get that sorted. Yeah, I guess I wanted to point out or maybe just be curious about y'all's reaction to the idea that the dirtiness of sex, as we're kind of deconstructing these ideas in culture, whether it's a feature or a bug. I recognize that sometimes we are really drawn to, dirty, filthy sex, and there's some appeal to that. And we're talking about strip clubs, and I know that at least some of the appeal sometimes can be that aspect of it. But I guess I'm not convinced that they would all suddenly close if we did have a more open and accepting cultural understanding of sexuality. I think about the fact that there's still restaurants, even though we're all comfortable with food, even though we can all cook ourselves. There is something nice about having a professional kind of specialize in that way. Is that comparison at all legitimate to the two of y'all?
It is to me. I mean, I don't think it would go away. I think it would hurt a little bit. And I think it would actually, I think it would hurt a little bit from the standpoint of the excitement of it. One of the things that makes it exciting is the fact that it's secret and it's something that, you're not like just going out to a restaurant and that's it. It's like, people, there's a reason that they have their bachelor parties there, because it is special. It is something that's exciting. And I think part of what makes it exciting is that people look at it as dirty. But I do think you're right. I don't think it would be completely decimated. I think COVID might have actually done more to hurt it than anything else probably could, because, this would be a really bad time to be, grinding on somebody coming from out of town or out of the country, or that idea is really close.
We did talk about that in a previous episode with Alice Little, I think, was our guest on that week, and she was talking about how the bunny ranches out in Nevada are kind of having to deal with this and being safe about health precautions. Christy, to your point, I think you're right. And I would also say that probably maybe a more apt comparison would be prohibition, where the way that it was structured at the time would fall apart. Like the speakeasies that relied on people coming in surreptitiously to buy alcohol probably did see the end of prohibition as a bummer for their business. But it's just finding a new way to market it as something that is not necessarily secret, but rather something that you can go and just explore and appreciate.
Without the mob and the shady business practices, and with a little bit of okay, all right, I'm okay with this metaphor. Let's push for that, society. Come on.
There you go.